Hello, everyone.
And
This-
hello. Well, what?
Don't fucking do that.
Okay.
This is Alison Gross, and this is the final video of our first season of Drunk Literature. Yeah, it took me forever to finish this. So, we are... Actually, can you go get me another cider?
Okay.
Okay, so I am finishing up this very large bottle of JK's Scrumpy Hard Cider. I don't know what Scrumpy Hard Cider is. Apparently very intoxication-inducing. And it says El Mexicano plus tax. This is Farmhouse Organic Cider. Yeah, it is quite tasty. It's $7 for this very large bottle, so I don't think that's a bad deal. Forneus is getting me another cider of something else. But, so we're doing something special today. I mean, it's always special, I guess. What we're doing today, we're going to do a modern novel by a non-American author. We're going to get into the post-colonialism. Woo! So, post-colonialism is about countries, normally most commonly former British colonies, which is why it's called post-colonialism. But
It also happened to French and Dutch colonies. And
right, yes.
Yeah.
Basically, it's any area of the world or nation that was previously controlled by one of the dominant Western powers, except America. America doesn't count because it's America, and fuck that.
America has to be different.
Yes. But anything else, like any country other than America that was previously controlled by one of the dominant Western powers, hence being in a colonial or quasi-colonial situation, literature from there is frequently considered post-colonial, especially if that literature sort of questions or challenges the the values of the previous dominant Western power. And that, in sort of a nutshell, is what post-colonialism is. There's actually a school in English of post-colonial criticism. I am not a huge fan of it because I feel that post-colonialism can get kind of bigoted and oppressive sometimes. Like, for example, the things of people arguing that black people should not write sonnets because the sonnet form was created by white oppressors. Yes, there are actually people who argue that. Like, I feel like you can like or not...
Well, you know, that black people should use jazz because those
Don't, Forneus, don't hijack my video. The reason that Forneus is here being annoying will be made clear very shortly. You know, I think you can like or dislike any form of literature, regardless of your own race or the race of the people who made it or whatever. And so I mean, nobody should feel pressured to write sonnets per se. Like, I mean, okay, writing sonnets is not my favorite thing in the world to do. I happen to really like sonnets, and I like reading them. And if other people, like, I appreciated it if other people write them. I only write them very rarely. But, you know, that's the thing, is that I actually took a course on post-colonial literature or actually they didn't call it post-colonial literature, they called it border literature. Which is, you know, I guess because some of the pieces that they used were not post-colonial per se, but they were all about, like, the interaction of people from different cultures at some sort of border area. But a lot of it was post-colonial. Like, there was one about some Caribbean island, and there was one about, like, Nepal and stuff. So anyway, what we're going to be talking about today is this book, The Secret River by Kate Grenville.
So So one thing I want to point out is the cover looks very different from the one that
Okay, I'm not sure why the design of the cover is of significance.
Well, it was very sinister in the Australian version.
Well, yeah, so the as you see, there's a quote at the bottom. You can't see this, but the quote is from The Australian. So this is a book. Is the author Australian or is she New Zealand?
Probably Australian.
But anyway, this is a book, a currently written book about colonial Australia, and hence it is post-colonial, because it is writing about a colonial society from the perspective of someone after that colonial society broke up. And it is subtly critical of the colonial society too, so it definitely...
Did you say subtly?
Yes. Because it's not straight up critical. It's
more critical of human nature.
But, but the negatives of human nature happen to be embodied in the colonial society in the book. And so this is, and so in that regard, it is also post-colonial. Specifically, it is looking back at the colonial society with a critical eye of somebody who is outside of that society, but still influenced on it because they live in a former colony. So this is about colonial Australia, and this book was actually a gift to me from Forneus because he wanted me to read it. They made him read it in school just the way that people in America, like when I was growing up, we were forced to read the Scarlet Letter and stuff.
It's very different, though.
Well, yeah, it's very different than the Scarlet Letter.
But I mean the amount of American material you're forced to read. Because it's just like, it's maybe one Australian book per 2 semesters for like 3 years.
No, we have an entire year that's just on American literature.
And usually one Shakespeare every semester.
No. So you read Romeo and Juliet, at least at my school, you read Romeo and Juliet freshman year. You read Taming of the Shrew the next year. And then the year after that, you don't read any Shakespeare because that's the year of American literature. So you can't read any Shakespeare that year. And then if you go on to English literature or AP English, you do a Shakespeare play in both of those. But the nice thing about that was that they were different every year because we had a Shakespearean theater just over the border in Canada that would try to do these, like...
different plays.
Yeah, and so whatever was playing at that theater would be what we would study that year, and then we would do a field trip where they would actually bus us all the way up to Canada to view the play. Now, that got shut down, because after 9/11, we couldn't, deal with the security issues of crossing borders anymore. Except the football team. So they shut down all, like, out-of-state field trips. Because of security reasons, they just want to deal with it. Students can't travel out of state anymore, blah, end of story. Except the football team. Yeah. Yeah, because going and, like, having a bunch of, like, fat guys run into each other and give each other concussions is so much more...
Did you say fat guys?
Yes. It's so much more important.
Are American athletes all fat?
No, just football players, because they want to be really, like, bulky and heavy, so when they all sit on each other, it's heavier.
So they're basically the sumo wrestlers
of the
Western world.
Maybe football players are not all fat. I don't know. I just know that they look like they are when they're in the football uniforms because they have so much freaking padding in them. But anyway, having them run into each other and give each other concussions is so much of a better, like, expenditure of your time and effort than, like, going to theaters.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't. You're supposed to take those to a tailor anyway.
Okay.
Please stop doing that.
There we go. Got it.
But that is digressing. This is. But I wanted to do this because it's something that's kind of different than what I normally do, and this book won on a lot of awards. Apparently, it was a man.
The Commonwealth Prize.
Oh yeah.
That's gonna if it's like a. I don't know how prestigious the Commonwealth Prize is, but the Commonwealth does, it's a lot of countries.
I think I was doing some research on this earlier today, like that kind of thing, about it, and I think the Commonwealth Prize is pretty prestigious, from what I remember.
It sounds it, because like I said, that's a very wide-reaching thing.
So the reason that that Forneus is here is because he's the Australian historian thing here. Because obviously Australian, like, history and stuff is very important in this book. And
I wouldn't call me an expert, though, because they don't shove Australian history that far down our throats.
Well, you're way more of an expert than I am. I mean, remember on my world history textbook that I have here that I can't show you guys because it's under the computer, that I'm reading for fun, it literally has 2 pages in the entire book, which is like 3,000 pages long. It has 2 pages of all of that about Australia.
It's because there was a point where Australia was more significant during the gold rush.
Yes, dude, we understand it. There was a point when St. Louis was more important than Chicago.
Yeah. Well, you're still going to mention that. I mean, do they even mention the Australian gold rush in that?
I think they mention it, like, in one sentence. But the point is that for me as an American, my understanding of Australian history is very thin on the ground. Essentially, before I met Forneus, all I knew was some vague idea that it was a penal colony. And that's all I knew.
It's definitely much more complicated.
Which is partly probably why he gave me this book, too. You
told me some things that I didn't even know about Australia, like that that Melbourne wasn't a penal colony.
No, you were the one that told me that.
No, you told me that.
Really? No, I thought it was just that we figured that out because of your accent.
No, I definitely didn't know that.
Okay. Well, that was only because I researched that after I met you, though. Like, I didn't know anything about Australian history before that. But obviously, like, Australian history is very important with this book, so I have him here so he can, like, talk about if the stuff in the Secret River, like, backs up what he learned in school or whatever.
We actually didn't learn that much. Well, there isn't much history about the pre-government Australia.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, but...
Which is one of the reasons why this book is so controversial, because a lot of it is conjecture.
Well, but it is based on, one of the things I found out when I was doing the research is that the author, it's like based on information that she has, like from diaries or whatever about her grandfather. It's supposedly based on a true story. Or her great-grandfather, I think.
Something, I would say.
That, I mean, his name is different, but Thornhill, who's the protagonist of the book...
Grenville.
Grenville?
That's the name of the author, Kate Grenville.
Oh. No, but her great-great-grandfather's last name wasn't Grenville. Oh. It was something else. Okay. I don't remember what it was, but it was something else. But it's supposedly semi-based on a true story, based on the information that she has about her great-great-grandfather. Who was an Australian convict in port. So the first part of the book starts out, it's about London. And it's all about Thornhill's life growing up in London. And mostly about how, like, oppressively poor and miserable it is.
Yeah, and every chance he has to better himself basically gets squashed.
Yeah, so one of the things is he's a ferryman. He rows a boat, and that's what he does as his job. And he's actually apprenticed to this other dude to learn. I don't understand why you need to be apprenticed to somebody to learn how to row a boat properly, but anyway, he's apprenticed to this dude to learn how to row a boat. And he falls in love with the dude's daughter. Her name is Sal, probably short for Sally. I don't know what it's short for, but and then after his apprenticeship is over, they get married, and her father gives him a boat as a wedding present, so that he owns his own boat, and they have this, for poor people in London, pretty nice life. They're renting a nice room, and they have a few kids, and he's making a good...
I think he only has one kid before he moves.
But they're making a decent income. And most importantly, one of the things that they stress is his pride in working for himself. Mm-hmm. Like, that he is his own man. And I think that that's important because it's kind of a theme later in the book.
Yeah.
And then the father-in-law just up and dies in this weird way. Like, his wife is dying, and he goes out to get medicine for his wife, but he's, like, gone way too long, and when he comes back, he has pneumonia. And it's kind of implied that he was out wandering around in the cold because the situation was so oppressive for him or something. Something like that. Anyway, he up and dies, and apparently it turns out he was secretly way in debt, and the debt collectors come. And this is the part I really don't get. This is where my suspension of disbelief was kind of suspended. Is that the debt collectors take the boat that he gave to them as a wedding present. Which I really don't understand, because it seems like at that point, since he gave it to them as a gift, he no longer owns that boat. So it's no longer liable for his debt.
Maybe he did it as, what's the word? Where you put something up when you do a debt and they take it away if you can't pay it.
Mortgage?
No.
Collateral?
Collateral, that's it.
No, collateral is different. Collateral is where you get, like, someone else to pledge part of your debt. Like,
no. When you put something up for collateral, you say, if I can't pay my debt, you can take this.
I guess. Well, it was pretty shitty of him to give them that as a gift then,
yeah,
and especially and not tell them. I mean, because I don't know, back in that day, they didn't have, like, boat licenses or something.
Yeah.
So if he's like, hey, dude, this is my boat, it's not his boat, it's my boat, you know, what are they going to do? Like, anyway, so like I said, at that point, my suspension of disbelief was kind of suspended. But basically, this is really tragic, because since they took his boat, he's not his own man anymore, because since he doesn't have a boat, he has to work for somebody else. And he can't, you know, really make ends meet, especially because his wife keeps popping out more kids now. Oh yeah, and there's one scene, because it'll come back later, and I remember this scene very vividly. Even when he's working for himself, he has these feelings of animosity and resentment towards nobles, sort of.
The gentry.
Yeah, because what he does mostly is he works in London. He ferries people across the river. You know,
it's like, oh my god, all these rich people.
Well, specifically, there's this scene where he's...
Oh yeah, I think I remember this, where this guy who just, like, hates him.
No, where he's ferrying the lady and she has the green velvet slippers.
Oh.
And he's, like, she's purposely holding up her skirt in this way that shows off her slippers. And he's like, why the fuck would you wear shoes made out of green velvet? Like, shoes are just going to get dirty. Like, and he feels so much resentment that she's so rich that she can wear these, like, fancy, impractical shoes and just show them off when they're obviously totally going to get ruined and she's just going to have to replace them.
Mm-hmm.
This is very important because this is going to...
Come in later.
Yeah, it's going to come back in later. So he has to start working for other people, and
I think he's a dockman or something like that.
I think he's a bargeman. He's, instead of working in his individual boat to ferry the nobles now, he works on a barge, which means that they load up the barge with, like, cargo and, like, transport
I remember it
it.
had something to do with cargo.
Yeah, and then transfer it, like, maybe from the docks to, like, a warehouse or something.
Yeah.
But what happens is that he and his wife turn to crime to make ends meet because, like I said, you know, he's making fewer wages now and she's popping out more kids and they just can't keep up because part of the theme is he's working so hard, but, you know, the owner of the boat takes most of the money he makes because since he owns the boat, he's entitled to his share, as it were.
Yeah, and it's implied that everyone who works like this has to turn to crime in order to survive. They basically take little bits out of each of the shipments and sell it.
Right, and there's this scene, like, because his wife is very intelligent, and she's also very obviously a good person. Did she learn to read? I think there was something about her learning.
I can't remember.
But she's very, very smart, and she's obvious, and she's also very
wise.
She's like a very good person. Like, there's a scene where he decides that she's the one he wants to marry, where she, like, I think somebody close to him had just died or something, and she's, like, comforting him in this really, really caring way. But the thing is that despite her being really smart and her being this really, like, good person, she starts stealing as well. And there's this scene where she comes up to him and he says that she's, like, all giddy like a girl, like she just did something mischievous. And she's like, my children and I went to the market, and the children distracted people, and I was able to stick this in my purse. Like, you know, that she's, you know, she even gets all excited about her first theft and stuff. I think it was like eggs she stole. Like, you know, it's this very, very small petty crime, like that while her children are running around being distracting, she slips a few eggs into her purse. Like that sort of thing. But the point is to show how this is affecting them. Another scene, this is from when he was much younger, when he was a child, that it talked about how he was never... Well, there's this thing, this kind of suspended my suspension of disbelief too, where they talked about how they would, you know, because poor people all had lice and fleas back then, they would pick the lice out of their hair and eat them.
I actually heard that was a thing. Mm-hmm. They even did that during the trenches, in World War One. Though usually what they do is fry them first.
Mm-hmm. Well, all I know is that in the Civil War they used to race their lice against each other.
I actually heard something similar like that about the trenches. They use these little games using, like, sugar cubes and stuff.
They had a plate. They would put the two lice in the middle of the plate, and the person whose louse got to the edge, like... Or maybe it was in two separate plates. I guess each person would have a plate, and if their louse got to the edge of the plate first, they won. And the thing is that the one guy was always winning. And eventually, this is in some, like, Civil War veterans journal, that he's like, oh, well, it turned out that we couldn't figure out why he always won, and it turned out that he would heat the plate first. Yeah. Well, there's this scene at the beginning that was this thing that I found really powerful, that he talks about how he's always cold and he can never get warm. And one day, he pees on his hands just to get them warm. Mm. And he talks about how wonderful it felt for them to be warm. And then as the pee lost his heat, and now his hands are all wet, and so basically he has to go around with his hands in urine ice for the rest of the day. And that was something, like, you know, this is one of these scenes to show how, like, horrifying their poverty is, essentially. Yeah. And so essentially what happens is that they're just managing to get by stealing all of these little things. And then one day they get this big shipment where it's Brazilian timber that they're going to ship. So this timber is worth a lot. And he decides that he's going to steal, like, a couple beams of it because it's like, well, if I can sell this timber, we're going to be set for a while. Mm-hmm. And his wife, like, has, like, a premonition or something, and she's like, do not steal it, do not steal it. And, of course, he does anyway. Like, he's in with a bunch of his, like, friends who work on the barge with him, that they have this plan where they're going to steal some of the timber. And essentially what happens is that it turns out to be a plant. Like, that
It's a setup.
yeah, the owner basically, like, created this to tempt them into stealing it so he could catch, like, if anybody was robbing him.
Mm-hmm. Although I remember there was a scene before that always stuck with me, is that one of his friends, like, before this happens, one of his friends gets caught for stealing and is going to be executed. And he pays off the executioner to make sure that it's the right length. So that he dies quickly.
Oh, no, you always, like, even way, way back, you would pay the executioner to do it correctly. Like, even...
Just so he wouldn't be lazy about it.
Yeah.
You know, sharpen the axe properly so it's as few strokes as possible.
But, so he gets caught, and he gets sentenced to death. And his wife, this is where his wife's intelligence really comes into his own, because she really actively campaigns to have his sentence commuted. And this one of the things I'll say about this book, I mean, it's supposed to be kind of a subversive book anyway. But it, in addition to its subversiveness of how it portrays, like, Native people, it also is kind of subversive of how it portrays women in that time period. Because his wife is so smart and so capable.
Yeah.
Like, and so she figures out all the right people to contact, all the right strings to pull. She has people write him, like, basically rec letters that are, like, character witnesses and all this stuff. Like, she finds people, like, nobles who were his clients when he used to ferry them across the river and all of this stuff. And essentially, she eventually succeeds in getting his sentence commuted.
What does commuted mean?
Changed to something else.
Okay.
Essentially, the long and short of it is, instead of getting killed, he gets deported to Australia. And the whole, like, first half or first third of the book is just the setup of describing the poverty that drove him to a life of crime that resulted in him getting deported to Australia. Which I guess the point of that is to show that, like...
Wasn't there a bit where she also takes up prostitution for something?
I do not remember that now. I mean, I guess the point of the first half of the book giving us this background is to show that the people, like the convicts who were deported to Australia, were not inherently bad people. Can you get me my pill, please? It's after 10.
Where is it?
It's in the, no, it's in the bird thingy. And the...
Okay, I'll also get myself another beer.
Okay. That like, you know, that they're not inherently evil people. Like, you feel so much sympathy with Thornhill in the first half of the book. Like he keeps trying and trying and he can't get a break. And you feel really, really bad for him. And you're like, oh, it's not so bad that these guys are doing petty theft and everything.
Especially because of the fucking society.
So the first half of the book is kind of like building up sympathy for the convicts, essentially. And so then we move into the second half, or the second third or whatever, which is all like when they've arrived in Australia.
And they met a strange lady who made them nervous.
No. They met a dude who made them nervous. Like, the first night that he's there, he's in this little tent.
Don't they also describe the boat ride?
Yeah, this is actually a flashback, the very first thing before you even go back to... And his flashback is that they're in this tent, and he goes out, and there's, like, this Aborigine standing outside, and he can't talk to him, and the guy just, like, stands there and looks at him, and he's, like, Thornhill's, like, fucking creeped out. But you find out about, like, the colonial society in Australia, which is, like, the convicts are essentially sort of slaves.
Yeah.
that when they come...
They're kind of actually more like serfs, because eventually they get
Well,
freed.
serfs don't get free. Indentured servants, kind of. But every convict has to have an owner, like somebody who signed on to sort of like speak for them, because it's like, oh, well, once a convict, always a convict, so there has to be this person who's like responsible for the convict. And these things can be like pre-arranged beforehand. Like if there's somebody that's like, I want to take on this particular convict. So essentially, Thornhill's wife Sal becomes his owner.
Because she goes as a free woman.
Right. So if you like agree voluntarily to go to Australia as opposed to being deported, you get first pick out of the convicts to work for you.
Yeah.
And this is another...
And this is the thing, they did that to encourage more free people to go there.
Which is what Victoria is all about.
Yeah, but those were those were free rich people.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of viewed as like this holiday... Well, not a holiday resort, because it took like 6 months to get there.
Right. But, like... You know, and this is another way in which it's kind of subversive, because, like, his wife is, like, his owner. And it describes them having this, like, sort of banter thing about it, where she's like, oh, well, you have to do as I tell you, or I'm going to give you a bad report to the... Because the thing is that And, like, the convicts who didn't have, like, somebody come over who arranged to take them on beforehand were essentially sold to the highest bidder.
Sold?
Well, yeah, this is the thing, so that they like own you until you have to get like X number of years of good behavior to be released. And so like every year your owner is supposed to submit a report on you.
Okay, this seems like very bad, like, because the owner, of course, would want to keep them.
Well, no, that's the point. I'm trying to explain how the system is exploitive. And he actually points this out. He's like, I'm so lucky that my wife came, because obviously, you know, she's not going to screw me over, or even if, like, she remains my owner, it doesn't really matter because she's my wife. But, like, other people are really exploited by this system.
Well, of course, if those people give them bad reports, and those people won't just even bother, it's just like, nah, I'll do it later. It's just like, I'm chilly now, you're not going to write a good report for me anyway.
Well, no, that's when they get deported to Van Diemen's Land.
Oh, no, I thought that's if they actually commit a crime that they're sent
Yeah,
around.
but if the owner reports that they're committing crimes, then...
Well, is disobeying committing a crime?
If it's severe enough. So, Van Diemen's Land is the colonial, very, very not PC term for Tasmania.
I don't think it's non-PC, it's just the old name for it.
But, and so, like, what happens is if you, like... You've already been, like, deported to Australia because you committed a crime. So if you commit a crime in Australia, you get, like, meta-deported to Tasmania, which is, like, even worse.
Yeah, that's the super penal colony.
Yes.
That's where all the fuzzy-haired Aboriginals were.
What? See, is this your good-natured Australian
No,
race?
no, they were, the people that moved emigrated to Australia,
Mm-hmm.
the same land bridge that got them to Australia also got them to Tasmania. Mm-hmm. So when that one left, the one to Tasmania also left. So those people came geographically
but why are they...
isolated.
What's the significance of fuzzy hair?
They had fuzzy hair while the Aboriginals on the mainland didn't.
Okay, I thought it was a reference to something like... They were inbreeding with, like, koalas or something. I don't know.
No, it was just like, this is really weird. These Aborigines look so much different than these ones.
Yeah, so they're like...
kind of like how Japanese look different to Chinese.
Or I think a better example is how the Japanese are different than the Ainu, but...
That's one of the islands near Japan, isn't it?
Well, no, it's this, like, sort of primitive people that live, like, way, way in the north of Japan that are sort of that for ages they were isolated from the rest of the Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know if they're ethnically related to the Japanese or not. I don't actually remember, but... But they're part of the same archipelago, but they're really obviously a distinct group that is separate.
Yeah, well, the thing about the ones in Tasmania is that they were part of the same group, but then they just became geographically isolated for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure they were isolated for them to become so divergent from. But, so they're, like, living in this shack is it Cape Town that they're in? No, that's South Africa. What is the town that they're in?
Sydney?
Primitive Sydney, but yeah.
Cape Town.
I'm sorry. Well, I know it's on this,
I know, because
like,
you've been watching
bay
the extra history stuff, and you thought of Cape Town, I'm guessing.
No, it's because I remember it distinctly being on this, like, bay, so.
Then it's probably Sydney. Sydney was on a bay. So it was Melbourne, but that was a bigger bay.
Yeah, but
so that's why Melbourne
this was in the penal colony, so it's definitely not Melbourne. This apparently is why Forneus has the sexy accent, because the state of Victoria in Australia was where all of the rich, pretentious...
Not just the state of Victoria, just Melbourne. But really? Melbourne is the center of Victoria, pretty much.
Well, I don't... The friend of mine that's...
Don't tell Geelong that.
Okay. This friend of mine who said that, like, one of her friend's wives had an accent like yours. She just said that she was from Victoria. She didn't say where in Victoria. So apparently it's the accent. I mean, you can hear that Forneus doesn't have, like, a stereotypical Australian.
G'day, mate.
I think that's a little...
watcha.
Little over exaggerated, but it's because he's from Victoria, and because that was a place where upper class people emigrated to as opposed to convicts. The modern dialect there is based much more on upper class British as opposed to lower class British, which is
Irish. Remember,
yes.
British and Irish, because you know. What's a worse criminal than a lower class British person? The Irish.
Yeah, and in that day and age, the Irish were pretty much criminal just by existing.
Yeah, I know.
Sad to say, but yeah.
That's the
for
truth
a lot
of
of British history, that was how the Irish were viewed. So a lot of them got deported, and that, like...
It was kind of unfair, because they didn't, like, invade them the way that the Scottish always did they?
No, but they were Catholic.
Yeah, I know, that's the thing. It was just because they were Catholic. It was so fucking unfair.
But, like, the regular Australian accent is kind of this blend of, like, London Cockney and Australian, because that was where they were getting...
And Irish.
That's what I... Yes. Irish! Not Australian. I'm talking about Australian... I'm drunk. Shut the fuck up. Because it was populated by the groups that were most likely to be deported as criminals because they were seen as undesirable members of society. And Thornhill is part of the London Cockney lower class. So, you know, he fits right into this. And so they have this, like, he and his wife have this shack that they live in, and they're actually doing fairly well. She kind of runs a cantina out of it where she sells rum to people. This is, like, way back to the very beginning. The Australian thing about being drunk all the time was, like, a thing even back then.
Oh, yeah, there's, like, this Aborigine guy who lives in the,
What was his name?
Benny, maybe? That's what comes to mind.
But
he was given some Western name.
Yeah, this Aboriginal dude who's basically drunk off his ass all the time, pretty much. And you get the impression he's kind of a little cuckoo, too. And he basically lies around in the shade, like, on the side of their shack all the time. And she'll, like, give him a little bit of rum out of pity sometimes. And one of the things that he's noted for is he wears very...
Scabby Bill.
Scabby... What an offensive name. That he wears this sort of really, like, beat-up Western women's clothing is kind of what it's known for. And so, like, he's kind of the in the story, he represents, like, the Aboriginal element that is trying to assimilate forcibly or not into Western culture, but obviously he's getting it wrong. He's not doing it right because he's wearing these like really beat up women's clothes, and he doesn't understand that that's not what he's supposed to be wearing. He has like this pink like women's sunbonnet, and it frequently like he'll like caper about in his like drunken stupors, and the bonnet will like go sideways and like hang from his neck by its strings, and they describe him like capering about with this pink sunbonnet flapping around and stuff. He's this really like sort of pathetic figure of ridicule.
And you got to remember, this is like Thornhill's first experience with an Aboriginal person.
No, his first experience is with that dude that comes to his tent on the first night.
Okay.
And the dude is very like silent and stoic and kind of noble-ish looking, and he utterly freaks Thornhill out. And Thornhill is always talking about how like Scabby Bill is much better because like we can communicate with him and like. And really what it means is we can control him. Like, and he frequently says, like, oh...
We're not afraid of him, because he's weak.
Yeah, he says, oh, Scabby Bill is totally okay because he knows his place.
Yeah.
And he talks about how he knows his place. And so the other reason they're doing well, he has this job, like, carting barrels of rum for this dude. And so he starts skimming rum off the barrels. And so then, like, people are starting to get suspicious, and he's starting to get a little bit afraid that he might get shipped off to Van Diemen's Land. Because if the dude finds that he's been skimming rum out of his barrels, that's what's going to happen. And around this time is when he meets Blackwood. Not Blackwall, Blackwood.
Although somewhat as bad. Okay, Blackwood's a complicated character. We generally have a negative view on him, though.
Yeah, he basically, so Blackwood is essentially a good guy, but the problem is that he had a potential to do a lot of good, and he essentially, the character, like, checks out.
Yeah. He's like the character from Animal Farm, the donkey.
That is a great, like, comparison. Like, Blackwood is the character who knows what's going on. And has the potential to interrupt
And
it.
has the intelligence But he just chooses not to, for whatever reason.
So, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, but what is eventually revealed is that that Blackwood can speak Aborigine. Like, he knows how to communicate with them.
At least with that tribe, yeah.
Which nobody else knows. And there are various scenes where, like, Thornhill, for example, tries to communicate with the Aborigines and is not able to. Like, they're not able to get past the language barrier.
This is actually a point of the story. He can sort of communicate with them. He just doesn't want to listen to what they hear.
Yeah.
Because I remember what he said. He's clearly saying, get out. Even a dog understands get out when he sees it. And then he just keeps pretending like he doesn't understand.
But likewise, that like in Animal Farm, the donkey is the only character who's literate and thus can read.
Oh, besides the pigs.
Yeah, well, thus he can read the stuff that the pigs are writing and knows that they're crooked. But just as Blackwood refuses to act as a translator, the donkey refuses to read the stuff
until right at the end, because what he said is something like, "I will only read," because. The donkey in Animal Farm is kind of jaded. He thinks nothing will ever change, but he fails to realize that by not doing anything, that's what causes it to not change.
Which is not exactly Blackwood's motivation. His motivation is a little bit...
He just doesn't care.
I thought you said at one point that it's kind of like he wants to feel superior because he's the only one that can understand these.
That's what I felt, because he kind of like paraded around his ability to Thornhill. That was always my interpretation. I don't know about you. I don't know about if that was the intention.
Anyway,
it was definitely a symbol that it was possible to communicate with these people.
I think that in any way he's a total ass because he like eventually it's revealed that he has an Aboriginal mistress and stuff, and when relations between the whites and the Aborigines break down and they end up fighting, she ends up getting killed. And her death could conceivably have been
Well, it
prevented.
doesn't necessarily say that she was killed. She just never shows up to him for him again.
No, but I mean, it talks about, like, I mean, when they attack, but we're getting way ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, you're really getting ahead of yourself.
So
just
they
ignore what she just said. Everything's all peaceful. This is a happy book.
No, it's not. So they go to, he starts working for, or not working for Blackwood, but working with him, where Blackwood takes him in this boat to, why are they, to take supplies to the various settlers?
Idea.
Yeah, I think they're, because take supplies to the various settlers that already live along the river.
Yeah.
This is the secret river of the title because they go into, it's like the Hawkbait River or something.
Well, no, the secret river of the title is based on a saying.
It's a double meaning, okay? It also stands for the Hawkbait River or whatever it is, because it describes when he goes with Blackwood, they get into this.
You almost said Blackwall. I heard that.
I know. I'm drunk. I may say Blackwall.
I heard the pause in your voice.
That they go into this bay, and there's all these waves coming in, and they're being driven towards the shore, and it looks like they're going to crash upon the rocks. Because it looks like it's a solid rock wall on the shore, and then at the last minute you see this little inlet that goes into this river. And so that is the secret river of the title. Because, and like, Blackwood is the only one who can find this. Like, he has to show Thornhill how you find this, this river. And so Thornhill starts going up the river with Blackwood to deliver supplies to people. And he asks him, how did these people here get all of this land, you know? And the rule is, like, similar to, I mean, it's not maybe exactly the same rule, but similar to the American West, there was this thing that if you staked a claim on land and lived on it for a certain amount of time, you got to own it.
I think there was a similar thing in South Africa as well.
And for someone like...
Which was kind of unfair, because they didn't extend that rule to the Boers. Only the English people who did that. The Boers...
No, the Boers were there first, and then the English kicked them out. So, of course, they wouldn't extend it to the Boers, because they...
It's only okay when we do it.
But, you know...
Really fuck the British Empire so much.
For Thornhill, this is amazing, because... Back in London, he could never have dreamed of owning land. Like, it was, like, amazing for him to even own his own boat.
I stake the claim to the entire of Australia.
Which, that didn't even last long, him owning a boat. So, he's, like, overwhelmed by this idea. And he's like, I could get land. I could be a lord, like those jerks I used to have to ferry around.
Yeah.
And then he sees... the spot.
Yeah.
Like, along the river, there's this one spot that he just thinks is the most beautiful thing ever. And he decides, this is what I want to be my land. I want to take this over and live here.
But before that, I remember the scene with, like, the Karawong.
The Karawong?
The blackbird. I always thought it must have been a Karawong because it described it having yellow eyes.
I don't know what a Karawong is. See, this is why I have the Australian expert here.
I don't know. I think it was supposed to be a raven, but they specifically described it having yellow eyes, which is something that Karawongs have.
Okay.
They're basically this smaller black bird that's similar to crow, but they have like a little bit of white on them.
Okay, but why is the Karawong important?
It's basically this ominous, like, foretelling.
Well, and Blackwood, I almost said Blackwall again, is you do not want that land. That land is trouble. Don't mess with that land.
Oh, I don't even remember.
Yeah,
this.
He's like, pick any other land, just don't pick that land. Thornhill is basically like, yeah, what the fuck ever, Blackwood. Like,
that's where the fish was, right?
The fish was further up inland,
okay.
but he doesn't find the fish until much later.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, this is another example of Blackwood being a jerk, because I think Thornhill's like, Blackwood, tell me why I shouldn't take this land, or what's wrong with this land, or something. And he's just like, it's just trouble, just don't touch it. You know, he won't tell him the real reason.
What is the real reason?
Because that's where the Aborigines farm their tubers.
Oh.
Yeah, and like when to jump ahead a little bit and spoil some stuff, Thornhill does end up like claiming the land, and then this is an example. This is another one of the themes of the story is the ignorance of Westerners that don't understand how to adapt to these new environments because he. Like, in an attempt, he decides he's going to be a farmer, so he starts trying to farm fucking corn.
Wheat. Oh, corn? That's even worse.
Maybe it's wheat, because back in the day, like, corn meant all types of grain, so maybe it actually means wheat. But it's some decidedly Western thing that they grow in England.
Well, corn isn't that Western, but yeah.
Like I said, maybe it's actually wheat and it's referred to as corn because... historically, wheat was referred to as corn.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
But
corn is maize, right? That's the correct term for it.
Yeah, I mean, corn, at least in America, now means maize.
Yeah.
But, like, in the Middle Ages, they would reference corn, and of course there was no fucking corn in Europe back then, and they were talking about wheat or other forms of grain.
Rye or... Yeah.
But
wheat
anyway,
and rye, pretty much, and barley. That's the other thing.
It's some like Western thing that like isn't really an ideal crop for Australian swampland. That he starts trying to grow.
Oh yeah, if it was swampland, that's even worse. Australian swampland is notoriously hard to farm in.
Yeah, so he's like, and it describes how fucking hard it is to farm this. Like, it is insanely backbreaking labor, and they don't get a very good return on it because the crop is completely unsuited for the environment they're trying to grow.
Because it's wet and it's hot and it's humid.
And so this is representing the like fact that
Actually,
the English
rice would be a great crop for that.
It's not rice.
I know it's not. That's too Eastern.
But that the English are trying to make Australia over in their image.
Oh
like,
yeah,
stupidly, even though it's like counterproductive.
Yeah, you know the thing about rabbits and foxes, that they were just basically introduced to make it more like England. They could just hunt wallabies. They probably run as fast.
That's a pest in Australia.
Yeah, like so many things that they introduced are just massive pests to Australia because they outcompete.
Poor little bilbies.
Because the thing is, Australia has very few natural predators, and a lot of the animals are adapted to that.
Well, they had the thylacine until
they had the thylacine and the dingo and nothing else. They had, like, secondary tier predators, no, like...
And then they were like, oh my god, the fucking thylacine is eating all of our livestock. Because, like... instead of being grateful that we don't have any other predators, let's just go kill all the thylacines.
Yeah, thank God you don't have packs of wolves.
Yeah.
You have, like, these single thylacines that occasionally pick off a few sheep.
But, so the thing is that when he starts, like, turning the land to plow it for planting this wheat or corn or whatever the fuck it is he's planting... He finds all these tubers here, and he's like, what the fuck are these ugly tubers? And he basically, like, digs them all up and throws them away. And when Blackwood sees this, he, like, freaks out. And, like, then there's a scene where the Aborigines come by and, like, pick up the tubers and look at them really sadly and, like, try to gesture to him about, like, don't put your corn there.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, this is, like, that's the reason that, like, Blackwood was like, don't take this land, because that's where they would grow these tubers that they need. Because unlike the corn or whatever it is, the land is ideally suited for growing these tubers.
So I think it's not exactly right to say that they were farming them, but I do know
loosely cultivating them.
Yeah, because one thing you do have to understand about most Australian Aborigines, they were very nomadic.
Well, right,
so they'd kind of move around seasonally. So they'd kind of plant all the stuff, move away, come back, and then it's all grown again.
But it's like they know, this is the spot where we planted all the tubers last year. We're going to come back here and dig them up.
Yes.
And so, like, because they've migrated away, they're not there at all at first when he takes over the land. And then they come back and find that he's dug up all their tubers, and they're really upset.
Yeah.
And the other thing, and this is where we start noticing Thornhill starts shifting. And, like, the second, like, the latter part of the book is all about his shift. And the first thing is he basically, it's about how he becomes obsessed with having this land.
Yes.
So the first thing is his wife desperately wants to go back to England because if he gets a good behavior, like even though his sentence to go to Australia is sort of supposed to be for life, there's this understanding that if you don't have enough years of good behavior and or you make a certain amount of money, you get pardoned and allowed to return.
You can kind of bribe your way.
Right.
It's not exactly a bribe because like it's an understanding. And, like, it goes to it's not taken by the officials to go into their personal pockets. It goes into the colony, but...
But the point is that there is this way that you can circumvent a life sentence and go back to England. And this is his wife's ultimate goal. Like, the entire time, she's like... Oh, yeah.
Make me this promise that we'll go back to England.
We're going to make, like, X amount of money, and then we're gonna like, get you pardoned, and we're going to return to England rich. Yes. And that is her ideal. And that's the thing,
if you return to England rich, you can get your own boat, you can do whatever.
No, but you can't get land. You cannot become a noble.
No, you can't.
Like, you could become a very prosperous commoner, and that's what she wants to do, and that is her perspective. And Thornhill is like, no, I want to get land and become a landed noble.
Though he doesn't he doesn't say that to his wife.
No, I mean, but that's his secret thought in his heart of hearts.
Although he in his own mind, he thinks that that's what's going to happen. But even when reading it, you know he's...
No, it's pretty explicit that he has no desire for that. Like,
yeah, it says in the book, he thought that he would, He thought that he was telling the truth when he made this promise. This is what he thought.
Well, okay, so first we have to tell about the promise, because his wife does not want to go off up the secret river and live in the swamps in this place. She is very resistant, because they've got their fairly decent, comfortable shack in Sydney, and she's making a lot of money selling rum and everything. And eventually he brings to bear the thing, he's like, okay... You know, dude is getting edgy because I've been stealing his rum. I'm kind of afraid I'm going to get deported further to sort of push her along to this. And eventually he makes her a promise that, what is it, like 5 years?
That seems right.
He's like, we will farm the land for 5 years, amass wealth, and then we will return to England with our wealth. And that's the promise he makes to her. And so she goes, and she's like, okay, but I have your promise of this. Mm-hmm. And then there's a tree next to the little tiny shack that they set up in this swamp, and every day she makes a mark on the tree and, like, crosses it out. And so even though he may have said, oh, yeah, I meant it when I made the promise, it becomes very clear early on that he, even to himself, knows that he didn't really mean it, because it talks about how upset and frustrated he is that she's making these marks on this tree. Mm-hmm. Because he's like, I now know that she's going to hold me to my promise, when his hope was that she wouldn't hold him to it. He was hoping she would forget the passage of time and not realize when it had been 5 years. And so the fact that she is so diligent about making these marks...
Because she's smart and clever.
Right. To record the passage of time, he gets really upset about this because he is kind of hoping to cheat her.
Yeah.
Like, even if he didn't think that when he made the promise, once he's there on the land, it becomes very clear that he actually does want to cheat her.
Yeah. Even if it's this kind of mental gymnastics thing, it's very clear to us.
Yeah. But, I mean, I think it does straight up say he was hoping that she would have forgotten.
I think it was a mental gymnastics thing, at least at that point.
Right. And so then they have this like hut in the forest, and the wife is very unhappy because they're in the swamp with all these like mosquitoes and it's damp and
mosquitoes, horseflies.
And they don't have, even for like convicts in Sydney, which at that point is the backup beyond, there's still certain comforts that they're able to get from them for themselves in Sydney.
Because there is a colonial government there.
Right, and there's none of that shit out here. And one of the things is that she's very lonely because it's just the two of them and their kids. And so then when one day Smasher Sullivan comes by, she's very happy to have company.
Is he the really bad one?
Yeah, he's kind of the most intolerable person you can imagine. Like he's
because I know that there was one with a similar name to Smasher. I
am pretty sure that he is the extreme racist.
Yeah.
And so he comes over and he just kind of like hangs out and kind of freeloads dinner off them because like out in the wilderness, you have all these laws of hospitality. So when a neighbor comes by and sits around you, like feed them just because you're so happy about the privilege of being able to talk to somebody. Except that in his case, being able to talk to him is not a privilege. Because basically all he does is spew all of this extreme racist drivel.
Like, even for the time, everybody's just like, whoa, back off, mate.
Yeah, everybody else is, like, his racism is so virulent and extreme that he makes everybody else uncomfortable.
Yeah, and this is like Victorian... This is not the good-natured Australian racism.
No, there's nothing good-natured about Smasher Sullivan. He's just like, he's the kind of person that you want to punch in the face and then shoot, essentially. But you notice that, like, even though Thornhill is very, like, pissed off about this guy and really hates, like, dealing with him, he doesn't tell him to leave. He's not willing to, like, speak up and be like, dude, you're being an ass.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah. Spider was the other one that I was thinking of, but he's not the extreme racist.
No, he's much less extreme. He kind of like, I think he like goes along with other people, but he's
kind of weak. He's kind of weak and passive.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so essentially, like I think Blackwood, and to give Blackwood this much credit, like I think at one point, when Smasher is there and he's being particularly...
Blackwood says, fuck off, mate.
He, like, gets up and leaves, essentially.
Okay, no, he says, I'm gonna go fuck off, mate.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's, like, it's Thornhill's land. He can't, like, tell Smasher to fuck off, but he's just like, I'm not listening to this.
Yeah.
But you could see that, like, Thornhill is kind of tolerating Smasher, even though he's like, I don't like this guy. So this is where he starts getting a little bit more questionable, and then then there's the part where he finds the fish.
Oh yeah, because before this point, he had said about the Aborigines, they don't mark anything as their like land. That's why we're better, because we mark the land. We build stuff up. This is why we are entitled to this.
And again, this is an example of how this is a post-colonial novel, because how he keeps saying that calls into the question the fact that is that a legitimate way to determine ownership? Like,
yeah.
You know.
And then he comes across, and you know, even if you don't think of the tubers, which are kind of evidence.
I mean, I thought it was pretty clear evidence. Like, after he digs up the tubers, the Aborigines all come and are, like, looking at the tubers and are all distraught. Like, you know, to me, it's like, it would take an idiot to not figure out what this is, but...
Yeah. And then he comes across the fish.
Basically, so there's, like, this land that he's gotten is, like, swampland down near the river that he came up on. And then, like, farther back, there's, like, cliffs. And he goes and climbs up into the cliffs, and he finds this fish carved into the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, nothing is really said about it. He's just like, oh, it's a fish carved into a cliff. That's nice. Like, obviously...
Doesn't he cover it up at this point, or is that later?
No, I don't think he covers it up. But, I mean, first of all, it's obvious that... To the reader, it's made obvious that, oh, the Aborigines built this fish. Like, maybe this is, like, a sacred site or otherwise an important site for them, like...
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. The point is, this is something to mark them as being here.
The other thing that's extremely important, I don't know where you get the covering up the fish, but the thing is, he doesn't, like... He thinks about telling his wife about the fish, but he chooses not to. So he covers it up in the sense that he conceals it from everybody else. Like, the fish is, like, his private secret.
Yeah, doesn't later he builds over it or something?
I don't remember that, but the fact that he's unwilling to talk to anyone else about the fish and he sees it as his, like, private secret is again the sign of, like, the fact that the lust for the land is, like, corrupting him. The
lust to be the gentry. To be these people who have stood on him his entire life.
I mean, that's kind of the same thing, because in that time period, owning land was what made you somebody.
Yeah.
And that's why he's like...
I mean, in an unofficial sense, being a rich merchant could make you
very influential. But it was very unofficial.
Yeah, it could make you very influential, but, you know, you couldn't be in... at this point, court wasn't really a powerful thing, but...
Yeah, to a certain extent it was. Remember, this is not straight up Victorian. We're looking at more like late 1700s, I think.
Okay, yeah. Because Victorian was really the last great, like, gasp for the monarchy at that point.
Yeah, but the thing is that the Queen was, like, chummy with, like, the Prime Minister and, like, the head people in Parliament and stuff, so there was still influence that went back and forth. But
I mean... The king or queen still has influence, but mostly as a figurehead.
Yeah, but...
She can't influence people at all. People can just tell her to go fuck off.
But, I mean, the point is that because, like, in the first half of the novel, or the first part, like, until, like, a bit after they arrive in Australia, like, the wife is so caring and so helpful, and it's portrayed that they have this really nice romantic bond and stuff. And essentially, and I found the story really, really sad and tragic for this reason. You see them growing apart because he has found the thing that he loves more than her, essentially. And that I think is what the fish represents. Like, the fact that he keeps the fish secret is that his bond to the land is more important to him than his bond with humanity. That he will keep the land to himself and will not share it with others. And this definitely also looms large in the fact of him not sharing it with the Aborigines.
Mm-hmm. Remember, he says something like, "There's so much more land out there, just go somewhere else."
Yeah.
And of course, the thing is, everyone's fucking said that to them.
Right. Well, and of course, he doesn't actually straight up say that to them because they can't speak the same language. And
but that's what he says, but yeah.
Yeah. And of course, like, if they could, they might say, "Dude, we can't go somewhere else because this is where our tubers grow the best."
Yeah.
But...
Or this is just where, this is where we've learned to plant our tubers.
And, of course, this is something that fucking Blackwood could help with, but he chooses not to. And so the thing is that there's, like, several years go by of them building this settlement in the swampland. And they kind of create better relationships with the Aborigines, especially, like, the women.
They kind of, like... All those naked women kind of come in at one point. Oh, at that point he had picked up more convicts, that's right.
Yeah, I'm about to get to the picking up of the convicts part in a minute. The fact that, like, you know, he thinks that they're having good relations because his wife will, like, hang out with the Aborigine women and they'll kind of swap items sometimes. And he thinks that, oh, we have great relations for this reason.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
But the other thing that he does is the thing where he picks up more convicts. So remember when we were saying that, like, the convicts that don't have somebody specific that's already requested them when they arrive are essentially sold to the highest bidder. So now that he has money because he's been farming and he's been doing this trade up and down the river and stuff, he goes back to Sydney and buys himself some convicts.
Convict slaves. And one of them was somebody that he even knew at one point.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was, like, not exactly his friend, but, like, kind of...
Just somebody that he knew. I think it might have been Spider, or was Spider another landowner?
No, Spider was somebody else.
Yeah.
Spider lived off of the...
Let me try to find it. You keep talking.
But the thing is that these convicts... So he brings them back and has them work the land.
Ned was one of them, that was right.
Yeah, no, I think Ned was the one he knew. But the thing is that you see him being really, like, harsh and asshole-ish to these guys. Like...
Not the way his wife was.
Mm-hmm.
To him.
Yeah. Like that he's...
There's even a bit where, like, one of the guys goes, "Hey, it's me." And he goes, "Oh, I own you now."
Yeah.
Basically. Then he's just, like, he looks so downcast.
That essentially, like, you know, that you think that Thornhill's
I remember. One of the people that was having good relations with the Aborigines was his kids.
Oh, yeah, and then he got all pissed off at his kids about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go get the belt again.
Yeah, no, his like, son learns how to make fire from the Aborigines in a way that's, like, way more efficient than...
Because the Aborigines were really good at starting fires. That's kind of the way they hunted.
But, you know, so, and, like, he's like, "Oh, yeah, I learned this really cool thing," and his father's like, "Don't go messing with them, they're bad," or something. Like, so...
They don't need flint or nothing like you do, he sulked, and no damned weeding the corn all day.
Mm-hmm.
Thornhill felt a rage burst within him. He grabbed the boy by the arm and pulled him outside, and in the last of the sunset, the din of laughing jackass birds, he pulled off his heavy leather belt and beat Dick with it. Felt his arm heavy, reluctant, but would not stop. Heard the boy cry out as if surprised at each blow.
And this is kind of illustrated...
He had never beaten any of his children before.
Which is really, that's kind of the key point there, is that this is... But this behavior that he's showing to his son, where he kind of randomly flies into this rage, is kind of paralleled by his behavior towards his convict slaves. And in both cases, what you can see is him really, in a way, like, feeling this need to have power over other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, you know, in a sense, because he was so sympathetic in the first part, and he's been through all these trials where he was a convict and he was downtrodden and stuff. And so you think that he would be sympathetic to people in these situations, but he's totally not. Like, he is all about him being on top. Like, that his thought is, well, and I mean, I guess that's kind of a thing that you see in, like, these days in terms of child abuse or spousal abuse or something, is that somebody who was abused themselves at an earlier point kind of feels like the only way they can therapeutize that is to take it out on somebody else. And so you see him taking, like, his convict slaves and his kids and stuff and people who are weaker than him and basically...
exerting power.
Right. And for the sake of exerting power, because he feels the need, like, his idea is he's going to transcend the abuse that he went through being poor in London by becoming a noble in Australia and exploiting everybody who's weaker than him. And the author does a really good job setting this up for the reader, because at first you resist this. You keep trying to come up with excuses. Like, at least this is what happened when I was reading it. Like, you don't want to see this because he was so sympathetic in the earlier part of the story. And then, I don't know if I'm skipping over anything or forgetting anything. The next major event I remember is the thing where, like, Smasher poisons everybody.
He gives them poison grain or something.
Yeah, everybody, the Aborigines.
I remember the Smasher also did a bunch of other stuff. He got all the seashell things that they'd been saving up and turned it all into lye.
Mm-hmm.
That was one thing he did.
Why was that significant?
Because the Aborigines didn't want him to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he shot a few people who basically weren't doing anything.
Oh, isn't it, like, Yeah, because, okay, so Smasher lives down on the shore, like, at the shore of the bay that they go into to find the secret river. And among other things, he collects seashells off the rocks there and stuff. But I think there was something that he goes about his property, like, with a whip to, like, beat off the Aborigines or something.
Yeah. Or sometimes with a gun.
And, like, at one point, Blackwood and Thornhill are there, and they're like, dude, why do you gotta do that? And he's like, this is the only thing they understand.
Yeah. Don't blame me if you get a spear through your chest. And then, of course, that's what happens to him later.
Which is, again, like, to a certain extent, Blackwood's fault, because if he's like, no, I know their language, here is something they'll understand. Like,
yeah.
But, of course, he doesn't. He's just like, oh, whatever, you're a dick.
Yeah.
But, so first they're all having a get-together somewhere, and Smasher puts forward the idea of giving the Aborigines poison grain.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, other people are kind of revolted by this idea.
Because, yeah, it was like, why?
And so, when he's out sailing around in his boat doing his, like, trading things up and down the river, Thornhill sees some weird thing on a beach and goes to investigate, and he finds these Aborigine children dying from having been given poison grain. And there's, like, it's a really gruesome scene where there's this one boy that's still semi-alive that's, like, crawling along, and then, like, I guess he watches him die this really slow, painful death from the poison and stuff. And it's never, like, explicitly spelled out, but it's, like, a sense that he knows that Smasher did this. And he's horrified by it. But, you know, and there's another scene where he's, like...
You have to remember, he's horrified by everything Smasher does.
Yeah. There's another scene where he goes to visit Smasher. We don't exactly remember... I don't remember exactly why. I think
Smasher, like, started... hanging dead bodies outside his land or something.
Yeah, I think the reason he was going to visit him is because he was pissed off about something that Smasher was doing, and he was going to tell him to stop.
Yeah.
So when he gets there...
he's on the shore, so everyone who goes up and down the river will see this thing.
Right. That it's like, you're creating unsanitary thing that we have to sail through and all of this shit. And so he goes there, and he tries to talk to Smasher about this, and Smasher's like, hey, dude, I've got something cool I want to show you.
Oh, yeah.
So he takes him into his house, and essentially he has this, like, naked Aborigine woman chained to the wall, and he's like, you can totally have sex with her, bro, if you want to.
Bro.
Well, it's a very bro thing to do. And it continues to be a bro thing to do when Thornhill's kind of like, no, dude. He's like, oh, come on, everybody else did it. And, like, the thing is, and this is where we continue to see the chinks in Thornhill, that he, like, is kind of tempted.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, he gets another one of these insane rages. And essentially lashes out at at Smasher. And I don't remember what the upshot of it is. Does he, like, free the woman, or does he just leave? Is this when Smasher gets killed? I don't remember.
No, Smasher gets killed off.
Mm-hmm.
He gets a spear through his chest because of all the awful shit he does.
Right. Yeah, I don't remember exactly what happened, but this is another situation where he's like, oh my god, here's this other horrible thing that Smasher has done. And so, yeah, he thinks that pretty much everything that Smasher does is horrible. And yet, the Aborigines are getting more and more and more aggressive. Essentially because Smasher is doing all this shit.
Okay, apparently Blackwood's beats the crap out of Smasher at one point. And says you had this a long time coming.
Yes, which he did, but that's not the point here. And so
but Thornhill restrains Blackwood.
Mm-hmm. Is this after, like, they find the woman chained up there?
I don't know.
And so, Smasher has basically created a self-fulfilling prophecy because he's like, Oh, I do all this horrible shit to the Aborigines because
they're evil.
Yeah, and then they start like becoming more and more aggressive because they're like, we have to defend ourselves.
But the thing is, they only ever target Smasher.
That's not true. They do that other thing.
Which other thing?
Eventually, they burn Thornhill's corn, and that's kind of the tipping point.
Oh, I don't remember this.
Oh yeah, no, they come and they burn his corn. Or he finds them out there trying to burn his corn, and he drives them off, and he's like, we have to get the corn in. And he and his family and his convict slaves like work to exhaustion all day to bring in as much of the corn, or wheat or grain or whatever the fuck it is. Harvest it and bring it back to the shack, but they're not able to get it all in. And that night when they drop from exhaustion and have to rest, the Aborigines come in and burn everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he's like, okay, Smasher, I will listen to you. Or Smasher might be dead by that point, but then he's like, okay, we need to remember what Smasher said. And that is what precipitates the final climactic event of the novel.
I thought it was Smasher's death that precipitated it.
I mean, maybe that as well, but...
Because it was kind of this, like, scene, like, everyone knows what an awful person Smasher was, but because black man kill white man...
Well, but, I mean, the thing is that Thornhill, like, if he had had any idea of speaking up against it before, he has no desire now because he is so pissed off because they burned his corn. Anyway, for whatever combination of these factors they decide, like the white men in the area, the former British convicts, decide that they have to go, like, basically massacre all the Aborigines. And Blackwood is not there. They start by going to Blackwood's land.
Well, apparently one of his slaves dies. Gets speared.
One of whose slaves?
Thornhill's.
Mm-hmm.
Sagety.
Yeah, one of his convict people.
Or maybe It's been so long.
The point is that this, like, they decide because of this long sequence of events that they have to go massacre all of the Aborigines, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And they start by going to Blackwood's land and murdering everybody there, which is where they find out that he has, like, this Aborigine mistress and
maybe
stuff.
Smasher survived. No, he did die, though, didn't he?
I don't know. That's less important than the fact that they go and, like, murder all of these Aborigines. And this, again, it's clear that Thornhill kind of thinks that it's wrong to do this.
But he kind of just goes along with it.
Well, he does it because it's in his own best interest. He realizes that he may not be able to keep his hold on the land without doing so. And since the land is paramount to him now, he's like, I have to go kill all of these people to protect my hold on the land, even though he feels really, like, horrified and disgusted about doing it. And another example of how he's moving farther away from humanity is that he lies to his wife about it. And he never actually, when you read the
Epilogue.
The epilogue, he never comes clean to his wife about this.
Although she has suspicions.
Yeah, it becomes kind of obvious that it's sort of the elephant in the room. Like, she knows what happened, and he kind of knows.
Because she's smart.
Right. And he knows that she knows, but they just never talk about it, which is part of why they're no longer close, because there's this giant unspoken secret between them. And so that's the climax of the novel, where they go to Blackwood's place and, like, slaughter as many people there as they can get their hands on. And then they kind of, like, go up and down the river slaughtering people, I think.
I think they find a camp.
Yeah, they like...
Because they did travel in big groups, if I remember history correctly.
Well, in the story, they definitely travel in big groups, because whenever they, like, come to his place, it's, like, a big group of them.
Yeah.
And so they just kind of go up and down the river and, like, kill off all the Aborigine camps they can find, essentially. And after that, they don't have any more trouble with the Aborigines. Funny how that works.
Yeah.
And so then that's the end of the novel proper, and it jumps forward to the epilogue where...
It's like a bunch of years later.
Yeah.
And it basically shows how everything is not quite right with his life.
I found the epilogue kind of stupid.
It was a really good idea because this was a really important part of Australian identity, is how basically they were all still considered convicts even after...
Yeah, no. That's not the part I have the problem with, because his whole thing is that he wants to get respect.
Yes.
He wants the real people at the top to respect him.
And they don't.
Right. And that's fine, but, like, it has all of these other little things in it, like he builds this grand manor house, and it's just, there's everything in the house is just a little bit off.
Yeah.
Which...
The portrait, which I understand, because the painter didn't fucking care.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this painter doesn't paint him right, so he has to get another painter to do it.
Mm-hmm. Or he orders these stone lions from England.
And they're not lions or something.
No, they're lions. They're just really badly done lions. And so he puts them on top of these really high pillars so nobody can actually see
them. And he has this, like, semi-observatory thing at the top where he looks out in, like, fear of the Aborigines returning.
And his wife, like, tries to make a garden, like a proper English garden, but of course it all wilts because Australia is too hot to grow those kind of plants in.
And she's kind of basically accepted that she's not going to go back to England in this, like, really sad way.
But, you know, he is happy because he mentions that he got his wife a pair of green velvet slippers, and wasn't it awesome to have sex with her while she was wearing them?
Mm-hmm.
Which is like, because he remembers the lady wearing the green velvet slippers when he was younger, and so this is like his like ultimate symbol that he's made it.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I felt the ending where everything is just a little bit off is kind of contrived.
Oh, and she like becomes fat or something.
Yeah. Which, you know, is kind of not surprising considering how many kids she had.
that was the thing, was because she kept popping out kids.
So, I felt that the ending was kind of contrived because so part of it makes perfect sense that, like, their life is dissatisfactory because they're trying to recreate the life of English gentry on the edge of the Australian frontier, and it just doesn't work. And part of the message is they don't get it. They don't get that this place is different and things have to be adapted to work there.
Yeah.
That part makes sense, and I'm totally cool with that. But
it's just like the universe seems to be conspiring against him.
Well, it seems like the implication of the author is that one of the reasons that everything is going wrong for him is as punishment for how he mistreated the Aborigines.
No. It would, I thought would have been a more effective ending is like some of the stuff going right and him just having this lingering guilt or doing these mental gymnastics to tell himself why it was right.
Like when I first read the book and you asked me how I liked it and we talked about it, one of the things we said was it would have been a much better ending if instead of him admitting that the lion sculptures were bad and putting them way up on pedestals, he would have like just put them out there and like convinced himself and tried to convince everybody else that they were great. Like he'd be like, "Oh,
well, it's modern art.
Don't you love my lion sculptures?" And then he'd hear like the nobles like whispering behind their hands at his parties, "Oh my God, did you see how stupid his lion sculptures are?"
Yeah.
Like, that would have, because not the first part, but the climax of the novel is all about him doing mental gymnastics to justify these things, and it kind of that breaks down in the epilogue. Like that doesn't. That it's. It's kind of like the author is saying, "Oh, the universe is punishing him here," which I didn't find a very convincing sort of argument.
Yeah.
I think it would have been much better if it had continued with him basically sort of punishing himself by using his brain to justify all this stuff, because that's the
and
thing
just
that the
showing
novel
how he felt this
established.
lingering unhappiness that he didn't know where it was from.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
but yeah, so I thought it was a good book overall, but like,
yeah, there was just a
the
few.
end.
There was a. Yeah, I remember my English teacher said exactly the same thing. He wished that the end is a little more.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, it was, it's not a pleasant thing to read because it does this thing.
Oh yeah, it's not a pleasant read.
That, and
Happy times with murdering Aborigines.
No, that's not what I mean. I mean, like, how the author essentially tricks the reader, which I don't approve of books that do that.
I don't
but
think
it was well
it.
done. No, at the beginning, well, not trick, but it makes you feel so sorry for him, and you understand that he is going to become so unsympathetic later.
Yeah, it's like...
But we are really...
There was a point to it, though. That's the thing. It wasn't just a shock.
Really running over time. So the other thing I want to do is to have you talk about the other meaning of the Secret River. Because literally in the novel, the Secret River refers to the river that he lives on that is secret because it's really hard to find. But there's a double meaning to it.
So it comes from this quote that says, "There is a secret river of blood that undercurrents Australia's history." And that's because not much is really known about the interactions between the early, convicts and the Aborigines. There's a few, proven instances of grain poisoning. That's actually a thing that happened in a few isolated places, but there's no actual proof because the colonial governments never did anything official. It wasn't until much, much later we had stuff like the Stolen Generation, which was basically these things where they tried to breed the black out of the Aborigines.
Mm-hmm. Breeding the black out, kind of like praying the gay away.
Yeah, it's pretty much. It was this thing that would go over a number, breed the black out.
So yeah, this is attempting to explore
because
this
is totally what would have fucking happened.
Mm-hmm.
I
mean, but we can kind of assume because we know that the Aboriginal population dropped a lot in this certain time frame.
The kangaroo population spiked dramatically.
Oh god, that idiot whose thing I read that was vegetarianism really harms animals. We in Australia should just all eat free-range kangaroos.
Yeah, just make them go extinct.
Yeah.
You could finish the work the Aborigines started when they made the super kangaroo go extinct.
It's kind of funny because they do the same thing with the Native Americans in America, that they're supposed to have been all environmentally conscious. But then if you really, really intensively study, this thing where they would stampede hundreds of buffalo off a cliff and then
Yeah. In Australia, it's even worse. They fucking made so many plant species go extinct with their mass burning techniques. And
this is why, Forneus was making the thing, and he's like, and we know the Aborigines are really good at burning things.
Yeah. It's kind of cool how they basically made all the plants adapt to the constant fires, because there's now these trees that only seed after a fire's happened.
That must be really annoying for the conservationists.
Well, fires do happen naturally in Australia, but when they're not being constantly lit, they eventually turn into these massive giant fires that rip through Australia. If controlled burning isn't done.
But yeah, so I thought that this was a really good example of post-colonial literature because of how it explores, even the most not sympathetic, but the character that's most sympathetic to the Aborigines, which is Blackwood, there are issues with his character,
He's not this awesome paragon of goodness.
Yeah, that essentially all of the white people's relationships with the Aborigines are complicated. And it also has the theme, which is a very like post-colonial thing to explore, of the attempt to import one area's culture into another area and how that like frequently fails.
Mm-hmm.
And just the sense of the fact that there's this oppression going on, like even though, Thornhill is a former convict himself and he knows the situation and he didn't even have it as bad as a lot of people did, he still like buys these convict slaves and like exploits them. Yeah. So, I'm not going to be doing a lot of post-colonial literature because it's kind of not really my thing, but given that I had an Australian historian on hand, I thought that this would be a good idea to do. And this thing is going way over time.
Actually, it was my suggestion, but...
Well, thank you. But we do kind of need to cut the video off now.
Okay, bye. Everyone.
Bye.